Eons ago, there lived these beings that roamed the planet, not far from Earth's solar system. These beings had powers beyond human comprehension. These powers were gifts, and these gifts had created the very emblem that brought us all here in the first place. This emblem had been made by an essence known in myth as mesmeradium. The combination of two elements, armadium, the powerful element, and drextrium, the deadly element. The emblem they created knew more about themselves than they did. Wondering what to call this emblem? They called it the Dodeca Prime, name being that it sees 120,000 to 12 billion years into the future. The emblem created objects as a sign of what would happen in the future. These objects were a scythe, a sword, a bow, arrows, a staff, and the worst one of them all, an AI assistant. These were only the warning that these beings had. Suddenly, one being caused a remorseless reckoning within the village. One hooded figure caused a genocide. The name of this being, only to be known in myth, was Inviditine Ravenglass, the one who decided to tamper with the emblem and tried to use it for his own gain. He tampered with it too much that the emblem split itself into 3 pieces, each piece scattering away from one another. Not long after that, Inviditine found the leader of the tribe, Slower Evan Rage. He picked him up by his shirt and whispered into his ear,
"The day of reckoning draws near. Once that day comes, you will all burn in despair."
Slower was then set free and he fled to a nearby forest so he could recover from his wounds and save as many people that were still alive as he could. Inviditine felt a slight poke on his back. As he turned around, he was greeted by a human-sized robot. This machine was built to manage the emblem, but since the emblem was gone, this machine served no purpose. Inviditine offered the AI to help him succeed in building a new empire. The machine agreed, and they both set off to find some objects, materials, and people to start a new era. A few weeks go by, and a sudden siren can be heard across the mountain range. Both Inviditine and the AI rushed towards where the siren came from. What they found was a completely new emblem. This new emblem looked at them. Inviditine felt chills going down his spine. It knew what he had done. The emblem then erupted an entire city from the very ground it hovered over. Hills turned into skyscrapers. Caves turned into mine shafts. Inviditine and the AI looked at each other and wondered if the emblem was doing this for their gain. Suddenly, Inviditine felt as he was being lured to the main area as the emblem was. What he saw when he got there made his jaw drop. A fortress made from armadium, linking to its emblem above it. The fortress was the tallest skyscraper in the entire city. Inviditine then looked to his right and people started to surround both the AI and himself. Once they were surrounded, the people bowed down to them. They looked hypnotized, or as they were controlled by something. Inviditine laughed like a complete maniac. Suddenly, the emblem stared at the two beings and teleported both of them into the skyscraper that it hovered over. Once they got to the balcony, everyone started cheering Inviditine's name. It felt like home to him. Years flew by and the AI started to act strange towards Inviditine. It started to cause havoc in the main hall, laboratory, and the city. Inviditine prepared for when this day would come. He had created a vessel to capture and contain the machine. This was known as the Havo Frame, name given to capture and contain those who cause havoc and destruction. The AI was now captured and somehow connected to the infrastructure. Inviditine decided to call the AI Havodeath. Havodeath then said to Inviditine,
"One day I will be on top and nobody will ever contain me ever again."
Inviditine then reprogrammed Havodeath to cooperate with him. This then led to the birth of a new AI, known today as Havocom. Centuries passed and Inviditine was getting weaker by the year. His wife, Abigail Ravenglass, walked up to him and announced that she was pregnant. Inviditine was excited and he said to his wife,
When our child turns 18, let them rule our empire. If it's a girl, name her Elizabeth. If it's a boy, name him Isaac.
Many months have passed, and Inviditine wandered the lab halls. All of a sudden you hear a baby crying from the room beside him. It was his newborn child. The doctor then said,
It's a girl! Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Ravenglass.
Inviditine was happy to the point of tears. He then picked up and cradled his child and said to himself that he would protect her with all of his heart. Inviditine then placed his newborn child in Abigail's arms and said to his wife that he would be right back. He had something in mind. Inviditine sprinted to the elevator, took it up to the main hall, walked up to the balcony, and announced that he has a newborn child to his empire. The crowd cheered for him. He then said that every year on his child's birthday, he will give generous donations to various charities across the city. This made his empire very happy. Suddenly, the emblem above shrieked a large siren and then electrocuted Inviditine in the back, causing him to fall to his knees. He felt like this was the end for him. His vision faded to black, and he died there and then. Abigail, a few days later, wondered why her husband never came back down to the lab. One soldier entered the lab room and brought the news to her. Abigail couldn't believe it. Now she had to raise her newborn child on her own. Luckily, she had an idea. She ordered the soldiers to disconnect Havocom from the Haverframe. The soldier went to the main hall and disconnected Havocom. Havocom then followed the soldier back down to the lab, and Abigail said to Havocom that she needs to contact an old friend of hers named Samuel Foreman. Centuries passed, and Elizabeth Ravenglass, now grown up, was married to a man by Graham Ravenglass, and they had twins of their own named Isaac Ravenglass and Edward Hale. The empire grew stronger by the year since then, and they had discovered many elements throughout the years. Once the two boys were grown up, Graham started to lose his mind. Elizabeth and Graham had a massive argument about the two boys and who should be put into power. Filled with rage, Graham picked up the red crystal and cut Elizabeth's arm. This caused Graham to be sentenced to a public execution. Before that could happen, he fled the city, never to be seen or heard from again. A few days go by since the argument, and Elizabeth was getting ill. She started to feel pain in her chest and her arm where she was cut. The doctor said that she was going to pass away in a few days. This made Elizabeth prepare a farewell message to the empire. A few days after the speech, Isaac was put into power. Havocom was his only companion ever since Isaac was little. Edward, on the other hand, had nothing, so he left the fortress every 2 days to find somewhere new to explore. One day, he found a village full of elves. He then greeted himself to the elves, and they treated Edward like a citizen. A few minutes later, a small elf came up to Edward and said to him that he likes his outfit and his hair. Edward then thanked him and asked what the elf's name was. The elf responded with Agathe. A couple hours later, a large explosion erupted 95 miles from the village. Edward and the elves traveled to the crash site, and by their surprise, Isaac got to it first. Isaac and Edward was enraged at each other, so both the elves and Isaac's empire clashed. It was a long battle. During the battle, Edward saw that the little elf was being kidnapped by one of Isaac's men. Edward tried to save him, but it was too late. After the battle, Isaac then dragged Edward back to the city and set up a public trial. Edward's outcome was never going to be a positive one. He was sentenced to a public execution. Like his father, he fled the city before the execution could happen. Isaac was enraged and he started a search for his brother. A few days after he started the search, he gave up trying to find him. He started working on a new experiment to try and get the progress on making the emblem more stable and powerful. So he told his son to take the elevator down to the lab to meet him there. Once they both arrived, Isaac's son was then strapped to the medical table against his will. Alice Arventine, Isaac's son's girlfriend, wondered why Isaac forced his son to be tested on. Isaac just told her to shut up and continue working on the elements. Isaac looked at his son's chest to find a heart-shaped locket around his neck. Isaac, not knowing what he was doing, stabbed the knife straight through his son's left eye. His son screamed in agony, and a few seconds later the building went pitch black. Once the power came back on a few minutes later, both his son and Alice Arventine were gone. Isaac, now enraged, decided to play a new move to change the way that everyone would look at his empire. He decided to create the next big thing. He decided to create a kaiju that history will never forget. This abomination was known as the Hybrid. This was going to be the turning point.